2 years, we move them over. We freeze the spec. That's it. We didn't necessarily write all the software, but we take all that software. We do massive batteries of QA. We do tons of performance tuning. We compile the bits. We work with Intel and Fujitsu and IBM and Dell and HP and certify by far the largest base of hardware, so you know when you're running, it's going to run. We certify thousands of ISVs and many thousands of applications, so you know your application is going to run on it. We do localization. We do documentation. We do service level agreements. And we ultimately bundle that together and sell it with service in a subscription form. Now, taking all that together, we now sell enterprise-class software that runs some of the most mission-critical applications around the world. Right? So, again, open source, some of these components were written by people you've never heard of in the middle of nowhere in places in the world. That's extraordinary. We have contributors to Linux from almost every country in the world. It's extraordinary. But by taking the power of that model and making it bulletproof, we make the power of that functionality and the speed of that functionality development and actually make it consumable for the enterprise. And when I say bulletproof, you know, New York Stock Exchange, $158 billion flowing through there on the average day. Dramatically more than that in recent weeks. I had the, I don't want to call it an honor anymore, ringing the bell on the stock exchange last Tuesday, the New York Stock Exchange, when it was down 500 points. So maybe I'm bad luck, so I'm sorry if you lost money that day. But I was also talking to the CIO while we were there, and they run everything there on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And most importantly, it's not just about the fact that it doesn't ever go down. They've never had an outage. It also is extraordinarily powerful and scalable. So in the last 2 weeks, there have been massive redemptions from mutual funds. And the way, at least in the US, mutual funds work, if you come home from work, you look at the market, you're scared to death at how it looks, you go on your computer and you say, I want to sell. That transaction happens at the end of day's price. Well, if you imagine you're a mutual fund and you're selling all day, you may win or you may lose if you traded halfway through the day and everything's marked to market at the end of the day, right? So what's happened because of the redemptions in the last week or two, there has been a massive spike in volume in the last half-hour trading. And you know, the CIO at the NYSE was so excited because he said, you know what, we're scared to death. You start seeing this wall coming in there, and so we're thinking we got to brace, something's going to break, and nothing's broken. So the power of having tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people contributing, thinking about working on it, working with Intel. You know, Intel's actually one of the largest contributors to Linux to enable, you know, their chips. We've been able to develop software that not only never goes down, but has performance characteristics far beyond anything our competitors have done. Just another factoid on that. There's a small group of people, it's just a large group of people, but a small group of programmers who are very, very concerned about power consumption and green IT. And so some of these guys got together and said, well, even before Intel and others can do things to chips, I bet we can find some things that we can do to make Linux run more effectively and more power efficient. There have been some recent independent tests done. Same application, same piece of hardware, one running on an alternative operating system, one running on Linux. And Linux burns literally 14% less power doing the exact same thing at the exact same time as a proprietary operating system you've probably heard of. Again, it's different things, different components have been able to move dramatically quickly because so many people are involved. Now, a simplistic example, I talked about Wikipedia and what Wikipedia does, and it's had the largest amount of information, you know, content by far of any encyclopedia type format ever. But I can tell you this, it's written by a lot of people. You probably wouldn't want your brain surgeon directly relying on what's on there because there is no clear review. What we basically do is take the equivalent of Wikipedia in terms of an operating system functionality, and we guarantee it. We make it all work. You can run any mission-critical application, and it is the most stable operating system out there. So that's what we do as a company. We make open source truly consumable. Now, while that's interesting, it's a first step in what I do think will be a revolution in the way software is consumed long term. And here's what I mean by that. I talked about the fact that open source, we and most open source companies sell software as a subscription. Now, a subscription, what we basically do is you sign up for a subscription, and you pay a monthly or yearly or however you want over a period of time, right? So that sounds straightforward. You either pay up front in a license or you pay in a subscription. The behaviors that those different economic models drive is absolutely profound, and in the long run, I actually believe are at least as profound as the power of the open source development model. And let me explore that for a minute, because this is the heart of why open source in the enterprise will continue to take share, will continue to grow, and will change the way that software is consumed long term. The typical licensed software company, typically proprietary software companies, think about the model. Their job, or their business model requires that they generate incremental license revenue, right? That's obviously how they make money. Here's the issue with that. Let's say, and every CIO just about ever talked to has run into this on multiple occasions. You have a piece of software, you like the piece of software, you're happy with the functionality, and once every 3 or 4 years, what happens? You have to buy the upgrade, or they're not going to support it. So you have to rebuy the same functionality. Now, even if the functionality itself in the license fee you're happy to pay, there's an integration cost just to integrate a piece of software for functionality you don't need. So going back almost 10 years ago now, when Windows XP came out and the Office suite came out on it, I'm sure about anybody could justify why it was a good deal to buy that piece of software and the functionality for desktop productivity. Well, if you look today, how many times have you rebought that same piece of functionality? This has gotten accepted in the software business. But if you're really abstract and think back about it, when I'm in the airline business, and I recently got to fly the A380, so I'll use that as an example. It's a phenomenal thing, a Singapore Airlines A380. I promise you, if 4 or 5 years from now, Boeing came back to Singapore and said, we want you to rebuy that airplane, there would be a pretty difficult conversation there. I can tell you when I was in the airline business, if Boeing ever came back to us and said, it's been 3 or 4 years, we want you to pay for that airplane again, you'd look at them like they were crazy. But that's what we actually do in licensed software, and it's gotten so ingrained in our mind, we do it and we don't even think about it. But think about that. You continue to rebuy the same functionality every several years. Why? It's crazy. And there's studies that go out and talk about that 90% of the functionality of an average piece of software is not used by the end consumer. 90%. Yet what does the typical software company do? Because it's motivated to generate an upgrade, it adds more functionality that people really don't want, but you got to add something to ultimately to end of life one piece of software and force an upgrade. So that insidious nature of forcing upgrades, even if you don't worry about the licensing costs, just the integration costs and having to recertify and get things into production, it's costing companies money. On top of the licensing fees alone. So even if you leave the basic economics of how much you want to pay for licensing, just the total cost of that churn in the system is highly inefficient, to the tune of, there are analysts out there that would say that that's hundreds of billions of dollars in total. Now, if you contrast that to a subscription model, I often get asked, who's your biggest competitor? Isn't it Microsoft or Sun or whoever? And my simple answer is no. Our biggest competitor is people stopping paying us. This is the true power of the open source model. It's kind of tough when you run the business, but our biggest competitor is someone saying, thank you very much, I love your software, it actually isn't going down, so I don't really care to call your technical support, bye-bye, I'm not going to renew my subscription, but I'm going to keep running the software. Right? This is the power. Once you have it, you have it. You can stop paying us and continue to use the software. We don't lock you in with the restrictive license that says if you stop paying us, you got to turn the system off. Right? Well, if you think about the type of motivation that drives, it's vastly different. First off, service is job one. I get a report every single Wednesday of any customer problem, I'm on the phone talking to people